I'm going to talk to you about fundamental ideas and illustrate their importance to the concepts of truth, knowledge, and therefore our ability to know anything, really, and also their important relationship to the concept of personal sovereignty. And that obviously relates to agorism, and obviously the ultimate concept of human freedom. So, as Derek said, this might be quite challenging, but one of the reasons why is that you probably haven't considered these ideas I'm going to discuss with you. And I don't want to sort of upset anyone's mental apple cart or anything, but maybe just sort of suspend your judgment for the duration of the chat at least. So, yeah, one of the reasons that we haven't probably thought about these ideas is that we tend to be preoccupied with the sort of ideas in the mainstream narrative, like the pandemic and the various other sort of issues about health and so forth, climate change, and these are quite obviously questionable. But there's the sort of lower level philosophic ideas, I think, tend to sort of drift past us. They're a sort of a cultural current that we perhaps don't notice. We don't tend to question these ideas, so we're going to have a look at some of those. So I'm a philosophical truth seeker, and I have a passion for the idea, for trying to find a way or articulate and prescribe a way, a method that we can discern truth, a method for validating ideas. We're not taught this in school, obviously. We use an implicit method, we use this method implicitly, but my interest is to try and make it explicit so we can see what we're doing. And from this perspective of my work in general, and coming from a philosophic sort of perspective, I have perhaps some insights to share with you, so that's what we're going to start with. So there are four basic or fundamental ideas that are absolutely crucial to this concept of, to freedom, basically, to human freedom. And the first one of these that we can mention, and it's the least fundamental, is one that you're probably all familiar with, and it's the non-aggression principle. It's the key principle in voluntarism, or agorism, as John was mentioning previously. So we're all on board with the non-aggression principle, and what this implicitly says is that it's recognizing that there are only two ways of dealing with other human beings. One of them is by force, making them do things or deceiving them into doing things, indirect use of force. And the other way is by reasoning with them, appealing to them, explaining, trying to engage them or contract with them. Only two ways, yeah? And we're all generally in agreement that it's non-aggression, that we should reason with people. So I want to go more fundamental than that. So first of all, a very, very quick introduction to philosophy in hopefully less than 2 minutes. Philosophy is simply the study of the fundamental ideas, the basic ideas that govern every aspect of human life. And you can't escape having a philosophy. Everyone's got one. You wouldn't be able to function without one. So your only choice really is to be conscious of the one that you have. So there are 5 basic branches of philosophy. Imagine you throw a dice and you roll a 5. You see that image of dot, 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 one in the middle, forms a cross. Think of that mental image, because that's the sort of structure, if you like, of the hierarchical structure of philosophy, of the 5 branches. So coming back to the People's Reset, just to complete the brief synopsis of philosophy. The first issue that we must address, anyone living a human life must address, first thing is what's the nature of reality? What is real? Okay, and that's down in metaphysics. And then it's how do we know it? That's the study of knowledge, and that's epistemology. So these two form the base of your structure. And when you have an idea of what's real and how you know it, you're then ready to address the central issue of philosophy, which is ethics, the science of ethics, which is all about it's all about determining a code of values that should guide a human life, really rather important. I think you'd agree. That's the central issue of philosophy. When you have a code of morality or a theory in ethics, you're then able to say, well, how should the individual man or woman interact with other people in a social context? And that's, of course, going up into the branch of politics, from ethics up to politics. And similarly, a theory of ethics also informs a theory of aesthetics or art, but we're not going to be talking about that today. So we've already mentioned the non-aggression principle in the sphere of politics. Excuse me while I wet my whistle. So with respect to this people's reset, we are rejecting an agenda that's been prescribed for us. We're rejecting Klaus Schwab's collectivist future, where we're going to own nothing and all be happy. It's the agenda of the New World Order, as I'm sure you all know. So we're rejecting one politics, and we are embracing and seeking and advocating for a politics of freedom. So these are diametrically opposed political systems. So from the point of view of fundamental ideas, it's going to be very useful to trace down and see what fundamental ideas in ethics lead to a politics of collectivism. And similarly, which theory of ethics might lead to a political situation where we're free. So let's begin by identifying what it is we don't want, the collectivist system, and what it is we do want. Collectivism is essentially a political theory that holds the group as the important thing and the individual is subordinate. Okay? The individual doesn't matter in collectivism. The individual has no rights, no property, and the group is everything. And the individual, the purpose of the individual is basically just to serve the group, give up your values to the greater good, we've all heard that one, of the group. This is the essence of collectivism. So the question is then, what idea leads that? And by the way, I mean, history has been pretty clear on the horrors of collectivism. Everything from last century, from Pol Pot's Cambodia, Soviet Russia, National Socialist Nazi Germany. These were all national examples of collectivism, and now we face it on a global scale. So collectivism, the idea of the group being important and the individual being expendable, comes from an ethical theory, okay? And it comes from the moral theory in ethics of the fact that the individual's moral obligation is to sacrifice their values to others, okay? Not about creating values and keeping them for himself. It's about producing values and sacrificing them to others. As a moral obligation, okay, that's very important. A moral theory sets out the right way for a human being to act. Okay, so if you don't do that, it's wrong. So that's the moral theory of altruism. Maybe you recognize it. And this is where we start to get controversial, okay? Maybe you can feel the hairs starting to stand up on the back of your neck. You certainly will in a minute. Altruism is the morality that holds that the others are the proper beneficiary of moral action. So the standard of a good action is anything performed for the benefit of someone else, of non-self. And it's often misconstrued. It's very, very commonly misunderstood, altruism, to mean kindness, generosity, helpfulness, these sorts of things, being compassionate, considerate to others. It's none of these things, ladies and gentlemen. It's really important to grasp this because it's a moral duty. It's an obligation. There's no choice. If someone's got a gun at your head and tells you to give somebody £200, you're clearly not being generous. You're being obedient. Okay? So there has to be an element of volition in order for generosity, kindness, these things to have meaning. They have to be voluntary. Okay? We're coming back to this voluntarist idea of agorism. So it's very important to understand that the moral theory of altruism is a compulsion, it's a duty. So let's look at the political system that we do want. We want to be free. So what, in essence, is freedom? Well, freedom is essentially the ability to act on your own judgment, to self-determine, to be able to sort of leave the group and say, do you know what, I don't like your exploitative, corrupt system. I want to go over here with my friends and set up something different. That is freedom. Being able to act on your own judgment. It's a political condition in which you're left alone by everyone else. Nobody messes with you, takes your stuff, interferes with you. You're left alone. Okay, so this is where we want to get to. And the important thing to note about freedom is that it places an enormous burden of responsibility on the individual. There's no welfare state in a free world because no one else has had their money taken from them in order to fund your lifestyle. So it places this burden of responsibility on us. We have to be up together. We've got to be functional units. We've got to know what to do. And this relates back to my interest in finding a method to validate ideas, because the individual sovereign must have this ability to know what's going on, to build an accurate worldview. So what does the idea, we'll come back to personal sovereignty in a moment, but what does the idea of freedom essentially rest on? This is the issue. And it all comes down to an idea in an opposing ethical theory to altruism. And the idea is that you have the right to live for your own sake. That's what freedom rests on. Think about that. You have the right to live for your own sake. And that's the start of personal sovereignty, taking ownership of self. So, this idea that you have the right to live for your own sake is the moral, or is the core presupposed idea in the ethical theory of egoism. Ooh, now we're going to talk about being egoistic. People are going to really wince. Egoism is the opposite of altruism. Altruism is otherism. Egoism is selfism, you could say. So, it's the moral code, egoism is, that holds that the proper beneficiary of a moral action is one's self, not anyone else, one's self. Okay, that's the distinguishing difference. And this is essentially being concerned with your own self-interest, looking after yourself. But that is selfish. That's what it means to be selfish, to be concerned with your own self-interest. So, goodness me, we're starting to get controversial now. Who wants to be labeled as being selfish? Nobody. The point is, if we stop and think, is that selfishness is a massively misunderstood concept. Selfishness isn't barging in the queue, it's not sort of taking the last bit of cake or grabbing the best seat by the pool. That's not being selfish. That's just being an arse. That's looking at such a short-term interest at the huge price of your reputation, your standing in the eyes of others. It's not at all selfish to behave in any such manner. It's selfish to get up on time, to brush your teeth in the morning, to tend to your own personal hygiene. It's selfish to breathe. We have to remind ourselves what exactly selfish is. It's selfish to choose a wonderful partner. It's selfish to have a great career. It's selfish to want to be the best version of yourself that you possibly can be. That's perfectly beautiful selfishness. So we've got to challenge ourselves here with this moral code. So what we're talking about here is altruism, which the cultural current enormously sweeps us towards. I'm sure you'll all agree. Western culture is saturated with altruism, from the mainstream religions, of course, for a start. We got images of Mother Teresa as role models, working in soup kitchens and all these sorts of things. And it so saturates our culture, altruism, that most people consider being moral as being altruistic. I was raised a Catholic. I had it up to here with altruism. So we need to question these ideas and realize the bottom line here on this issue, and we've come to the second issue of the four. We've come down from politics into ethics, and we're identifying the central issue that leads to a politics of collectivism is altruism. That should really ring alarm bells, guys, because our culture's saturated with altruism. Is it a surprise that we're drifting with the cultural current towards collectivist tyranny? I suggest not. And we have to grasp that it's the opposite theory of ethics. Egoism. Hasn't that had a bad rap? Nobody wants to be seen as being egoistic, but that actually is the moral code that can lead us not only to freedom, but as I said earlier, it's the beginning of personal sovereignty. I have the right to live for my own sake. When I'm ready and when I've created values, I will happily give and share with others, but I must, as a life-supporting prerequisite, focus on my own self-interest, first and foremost, as a priority. Makes sense. Anyone who's taken a flight has heard the safety briefing, where we're told that in the event of a decompression and the cabin decompresses, reach for your own mask first, put that on, of course, because you've only got seconds before you pass out. In that case, it's quite clear that's the thing to do, but it's also a principle that serves your life in general. So, we've gone down into the ethical. We've looked at the non-aggression principle in politics, in ethics, rational egoism. We have to put rational in front of that just to make it extra clear. But we need to go even deeper, because I've just said that personal sovereignty begins with recognizing that it's your life. You own it, okay? You own your body, you own your mind, you own the product of your effort. It's yours, your life. It is not it's not owned by the group. It's really important to get that. So that's the basis of personal sovereignty. But also, the personally sovereign must be able to assemble a meaningfully accurate worldview. We need to know what's going on. Of course we do. We need to know how to do these permacultural growings. We need to know how to be healthy. We need to know how to build parallel networks outside of the system. So we need a means to confidently arrive at what we can claim as our knowledge. So we need, in our philosophical structure, politics, ethics, we need to go down into metaphysics and epistemology, because these two subjects form the basis of our worldview and essentially how we know anything. And again, we're going to notice that the cultural current sweeps us away from the conclusion that supports, or the idea that supports, the freedom that we want. So what's the basic issue in metaphysics? It's what's the nature of reality? Is it real? Is it independent of us? Is it an objective absolute? Or is it a creation of consciousness? Like, are we all living in the Matrix, in a computer-simulated thing or something? That's the basic issue. Is it a creation of consciousness, or is it real and separate from us? Was it here first? And the basic issue over in epistemology is, should we use reason, our faculty of reason, as our means to acquire knowledge, or can we use some non-rational means? Can we use faith, emotions, hunches, gut feelings, all of these things, okay? That's the basic issue. So right off the bat, I want to say that on these two issues, and there's either way you can go on those, they are genuine dichotomies, by the way. Ethics is not. There's different forms of ethics. But these are genuine dichotomies. There is only one answer on those two issues that supports the outcome of human freedom and flourishment. And the first thing I want you to note is that all of our functional human actions in any day, anything you do, making a cup of tea, driving the car, all rests on the presupposition that reality is separate from us. It's an objective absolute. That's the mental presupposition that we're not even aware of, but it's there. And also the presupposition that your faculty of reason, using the method of logic, is your means of knowing stuff, yeah? That's your means of functioning. So by way of illustrating that, let's just look at something really simple that we all do all the time, every day, walking through a door. So you walk up to the door. What are you presupposing? What are we demonstrating is going on? Implicitly, I hasten to add, we're not thinking these things, obviously, but it's an implicit component to our action. So we walk up to the door, we immediately grasp the identity of the door, and we distinguish it from the identity of a surrounding wall structure. We also simultaneously grasp that it's the door that we're going to go through, not the wall. So we've grasped causality. What a thing will do depends on what it is. We've also demonstrated that our consciousness is not sufficient on its own to change the identity of the door from being closed to open so we can go through, or to change the identity of our location from these coordinates to those coordinates. So we're demonstrating a recognition that action is required. And lastly, we're demonstrating the use of logic. We recognize that if we want to be in that room, we can't simultaneously not be in that room. So contradictions don't exist. So these 4 points all rest on and are components of or expressions of the fundamental presuppositions that reality is objective, it's separate from us, and that reason is our means to know it. Now, the second point to note, closely related, is that the concepts of truth and knowledge rest on this presupposition of an objective reality. Let's just illustrate that. Supposing I told you your car tire was flat, what would you do to check out my statement, to validate it? Well, you'd probably go and look. You'd go and check your car, meaning you'd go and consult reality. You'd go there, have a look at what actually is in reality, and you'd compare that against my statement, and if they match, my statement was true. So in other words, reality is our standard of truth. Yeah? It's the only possible standard of truth if you go away and think about this, ladies and gentlemen. So hence this presupposition that reality is an objective, absolutely, it's separate from us. It has to be for truth to have any meaning. And for knowledge to have any meaning. Knowledge properly pertains to all that is reality. If we imagine that reality is some movable flux, that different groups of people could have different knowledge and have different beliefs that made things change, then what does knowledge mean? It doesn't mean anything. That's the undermining of the concepts of truth and knowledge. So, excuse me while I just wet my whistle again. So the first thing to acknowledge here is there's scope for confusion, okay? There's huge scope for confusion. You've probably heard that every good lie has some truth in it. On the metaphysical issue, there's huge scope for confusion because, of course, we do create our experience of reality. Consciousness, we are creators, you know. Consciousness has a fantastic ability to create every aspect of our life experience almost. But there's a line where you can't cross, basically. You can't change the identity of something. You can't change the identity of a chair into something else. With your consciousness alone, it requires action. So there's an enormous amount we can control. We can create everything. We have the ability to determine our degree of knowledge. We can determine how we conduct each other. We can choose partners and careers. Collectively, we can build towns and cities and environments, institutions and customs and things. We have an enormous creativity. We can even affect our physiology. We can worry ourselves sick. We can make ourselves better with a placebo. Consciousness can affect water, the work of Veda Austin and Masaru Emoto. Consciousness is an amazing thing that we don't yet fully understand, and we must explore all these things. We must find out more. But we mustn't jump to a conclusion and say, oh, well, therefore, thoughts create reality if that undermines our basic presupposition on our human functionality. Should be a real warning sign there. So there's scope for confusion. And we haven't got time to thrash out all the details today, but this confusion is, of course, exploited by what I call the cultural undercurrent. We're very much encouraged towards one belief. And just a quick word about this, like any tyranny, any misleader, any dictator, or any political system which would exploit and enslave us wants to disrupt our means to knowledge. We've got to be a bunch of gibbering idiots to be easily led, okay? We want to be dumbed down. Most of us are familiar with the fact that the education system has been dumbed down. Well, I suggest to you through this talk on fundamental ideas that we've been philosophically lied to as well. There's this undercurrent that we don't think to question. Who thinks of questioning altruism and the nature of reality in these, with the implications? So it passes undetected. But the point is that it's very much in the interest of any would-be tyrants or any political system that will enslave us to undermine our concepts of truth and knowledge by changing our convictions on the fundamental metaphysical issue and changing our convictions on the fundamental epistemological issues. That's a very important point to bear in mind. On the philosophical side of it, the New Age movement and the law of attraction and scores of books and things have been advocating that we create our own reality in a metaphysical sense. They don't stop and say, oh, but there is a limit. You can't actually do this. You can't make water flow uphill. You can't stop magnetism or stop radiation from happening, the natural phenomena. There's no distinction made. People often refer to the double slit experiments. Well, there's the proof. There's the proof that people say that contradictions do exist because light can be a wave and a particle. And also it's proof that thought creates reality because when you observe the experiment, the wave of potential collapses into a particle of actuality. We've all heard this, but I suggest to you guys that this was the mainstream news of 100 years ago. These revised double slit experiments were performed about 100 years ago, and they were the mainstream news of the day. Just like we're dealing with pandemics and climate change now, that was what was being talked about then. We should apply the same degree of suspicion to all ideas, whether they're from this year, 10 years, or 500 years ago, should all be subject to our means of validation. So lastly on that point, mainstream philosophy has been dominated by idealism for about the last 250 years. And philosophy being the mother of all science, I strongly suggest that was corrupted long before the mainstream media was corrupted. Think about it, guys. The philosophical ideas that come down from the establishment are not questioned as being manipulated, bought, influenced by powers that shouldn't be. I suggest perhaps they are. Mainstream philosophy has been saturated with this idea of idealism, that human thought creates reality, literally, in a metaphysical sense, for quite some time. So there's confusion as well over in the epistemological issue. And it's very understandable. I mean, we've all had an experience where we've had a hunch, and we followed that hunch, we found out it's true. I'm sure everyone's had that. I've had that. We've had feelings that something is true, and it turns out to be true. So this is very, very understandable. But the point here, when we're talking about our means of knowing things, we're talking about what's the sanction of your convictions. What are the reasons that hold up your conclusion, that support it? And it's okay, and it's very valid, in fact, to follow a hunch. I always do. In my method of truth-seeking, I consider a hunch or an intuition as a lead. And like any investigator, I'm going to follow that lead. But I'm going to do that by asking questions and conducting a rational inquiry. I'm not just going to stop with my intuition and say, yeah, okay, well, that's it. I've got it. I know that now. Because you haven't got any reasons. And again, this confusion is exploited. Our culture, I suggest, is heavily saturated with the emotional over and above the rational. I always remember Star Trek, the 1960s sci-fi show, in which Captain James T. Kirk was the warm, emotional human, and First Officer Spock was the logical alien. There's a really powerful message in there. And we've got things like political correctness. Political correctness is a social manifestation of the elevation of the importance of emotions over clear, precise communication. We mustn't upset people's feelings as a priority. Of course, we don't want to upset anyone's feelings anyway, but the point is it's elevated observably above the need to just be clear and direct with our language. So the point there is that there's this cultural undercurrent that's trying to devalue reason as our means to knowledge. So I want to conclude by just looking a little bit at what I refer to as the epistemology of reason versus an epistemology of ultimately emotions. There's a big danger in the epistemology of emotions if we use that as the sanction of our convictions. And the thing about using an epistemology of reason is that you very literally have reasons. You ask why something is true, and you find out why, the reason. And you have this structure to your knowledge where reasons or facts, remember we're acknowledging that facts, that reality is an objective absolute, and we're acknowledging that, and we have reasons to support our conclusions, which means we have understanding, we can communicate our ideas, we can extend our knowledge. We can correct our knowledge. We can communicate it. But over on the epistemology of emotion, no such possibility. If you just believe an idea, if you just know it, and you're happy with that, you have no understanding. Well, how do you know that's true? I don't know. I don't know what the reasons are, but I feel it. So you can't correct your claim of knowledge. I would suggest that isn't knowledge, it's a belief. But you can't correct it, you can't extend it, you can't explain to others. That's intellectual stagnation. All right, I'm going to hurry up and bring this to a quick conclusion. But one more important point to note, that in the epistemology of emotion, if you're focused on your emotions, if you're centered on them, if you're in your emotions, you're going to be really vulnerable to fear-based propaganda. And this is why it's so effective. The powers that shouldn't be know this. They want to undermine our means to knowledge. That's why they frighten us. But if we're thinking rationally and logical, and we're going by our critical faculty to know what's true, then we won't be fooled by logical fallacies. We won't be scared by fear-based propaganda. So it's very, very important. Anyway, I'll leave that issue there. In a very quick summary, these three ideas I've looked at, we've briefly mentioned the non-aggression principle, which is recognizing reason, again, our means to deal with each other. We've looked at this ethics, the ethics of egoism. We've looked at the nature of reality and that we must hold as sacrosanct that it's objective. That's the basis of all our knowledge. And the issue in epistemology, what's our means to know? And reason must be the sanction of our convictions. And none of that, I hasten to add, is to take anything away from emotions. They're wonderful. I'm the weepiest guy in a sad movie, I can assure you. Emotions are fantastic. So hopefully this helps. Maybe I've challenged you, but let's think of the undercurrent, okay? Let's think of the ideas that are more fundamental than the mainstream news. Thank you very much for listening.
Make some noise for Nigel. You going to be here this week, tomorrow, today?